You're coming with me now! Stop! You're hurting me!
He thought I was just a waitress, poor, powerless, and easy to humiliate. He grabbed my hair and dragged me across the cafe floor while everyone watched. But when the man who owned half the city walked in, the laughter died. Because the woman he'd insulted wasn't ordinary, she was family. If you've ever been looked down on for where you work or how you dress, this story will stay with you. Watch till the end, because karma doesn't always knock softly. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and share. And remember, quiet dignity always wins louder than arrogance. I never planned to fall in love with someone like him. Back then, I was just a simple waitress at Rosewood Cafe, the kind of place where rich people came for fancy pastries and poor souls like me worked endless hours just to survive another month. My mornings smelled of coffee and exhaustion. My nights were filled with aching feet and whispered prayers that tomorrow might be kinder. Still, I loved my work. It gave me dignity. It gave me purpose. And in a world where people often confuse wealth with worth, that meant everything to me. It was a quiet afternoon when I first saw him, Ethan Sterling. He wasn't like the other customers who barely looked up from their phones. He smiled when I brought his order, thanked me by name after reading my badge, and even asked how my day was going. It sounds small, but kindness feels like gold when you're used to being invisible. For weeks he came back, same table, same coffee, same gentle curiosity. I thought he was just being polite, but soon I realized he was studying more than the menu. He was studying me. At first, I tried to ignore it. Men like him didn't fall for girls like me. He carried quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself, but there was warmth in his eyes, something disarming, something real. We started talking about dreams, fears, little things that made the world feel lighter. I told him about my mother's illness, how every extra shift went straight to her medicine. He didn't pity me. He admired me. And that somehow was worse, because it made me start to believe I deserved more than just surviving. When he finally told me his last name, Sterling, I froze. Everyone in the city knew that name. His father owned hotels, properties, even half the street our cafe stood on. I laughed nervously, thinking he was teasing me, but he wasn't. He said he'd kept it secret because he wanted me to see him as a man, not a name. That honesty touched something deep inside me, the part of me that still believed in good hearts beneath all the glitter. As the weeks turned into months, our conversations turned into something softer, deeper. I tried to resist it, reminding myself that love between worlds like ours never ends well. But love has its own stubborn way of crossing lines drawn by pride and class. And when he finally held my hand and said, "Emma, I don't care where you come from. I care where we can go together," I knew my life was about to change forever. I didn't realize then that love, no matter how pure, would soon be tested in the cruelest way possible. Because when the world finds out who you are, it doesn't always clap. Sometimes it claws. Falling in love with Ethan felt like stepping into sunlight after years of rain. He wasn't loud about his affection, no grand gestures, no empty promises, just quiet consistency, the kind that wraps around you and makes you feel safe. I'd never had that before. We spent evenings walking by the river, talking about simple things, books, music, the dreams we hadn't told anyone else. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. But when he asked me to meet his family, my heart froze. The Sterlings weren't just wealthy, they were legendary. Old money, powerful friends, influence that stretched beyond business and politics. I'd seen their family on magazine covers. His father, Mr. Sterling, always stoic and untouchable. The idea of standing in front of him made me feel small, like I'd never belong in their world. Yet Ethan just smiled and said, "You don't need to belong. You just need to be yourself." The day I met Mr. Sterling, I expected arrogance. Instead, I found silence, a kind that measured more than it spoke. He studied me for a moment, then said, "My son sees something in you." I'd like to see it too. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't rejection either. I held my ground, looked him in the eye and said, I love your son, but I won't let his world change who I am." For the first time, I saw the corners of his lips soften. Not quite a smile, but something close. After that meeting, Ethan told me his father had suggested something, a test, in his own quiet way. Mr. Sterling owned several new cafes and wanted someone trustworthy to manage one. Ethan offered me the position, proud to see me rise, but I surprised them both when I said no. "I don't want to start at the top," I told him. "If I'm going to manage people one day, I need to understand their struggles first. Let me start where I belong." As a waitress, Ethan frowned at first, thinking I was being humble to a fault, but his father said something that silenced us both. Wisdom doesn't need a title. It just needs purpose. And so the plan was set. I would work at one of the new Sterling cafes. No one would know who I was. Not as Ethan's fiancée, not as the future daughter-in-law of a billionaire. Just Emma, a new waitress trying to prove herself. That night, as Ethan held me close, he whispered, "You have no idea how proud I am of you." I smiled, but deep down, a strange nervousness lingered, because I knew the world could be cruel, and sometimes it only takes one arrogant stranger to remind you exactly how fragile dignity can be. What I didn't know then was that the very next day, fate would test me harder than I'd ever imagined. The morning of my first day at the new cafe felt different. I woke up early, my hands trembling a little as I tied my apron and adjusted the name tag that simply read, Emma. No last name, no connections, no hidden privilege, just me. I wanted to understand what it meant to serve, to earn respect the same way I had in every other job. The cafe itself was beautiful. Soft cream walls, the smell of fresh pastries, and sunlight spilling across the polished floors. Everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect. The staff didn't know who I really was. To them, I was just a newcomer trying to find her way through the morning rush. Some were friendly, others distant, the usual hierarchy of a workplace. I smiled through the chaos, greeting customers, balancing trays, memorizing orders. For a while, I felt at home again, back in the rhythm of honest work, back where humility wasn't a weakness, but a quiet kind of pride. Ethan had promised to stay away that day. "You need to do this on your own," he'd said with a grin. And I wanted that. I wanted the freedom to be judged not as someone's fiancé, but as a woman who could hold her ground. For the first few hours, everything went smoothly, until he walked in. The door chimed softly, and the air in the cafe shifted. He was tall, dressed in an expensive beige suit, his watch gleaming brighter than his manners. The moment his eyes landed on me, I knew he was the kind of man who believed money made him untouchable. He ordered without looking at me, coffee, extra strong, and snapped his fingers as if I were furniture instead of human. I stayed calm, wrote it down, and served him anyway. He didn't thank me. He didn't even nod. He just leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone, muttering insults about slow service and untrained staff. The other waiters avoided him like a storm cloud, but I had to keep going. That's the job. You smile, you serve, you move on. Still, I could feel his eyes following me, the smirk that came every time I passed his table. It wasn't just arrogance, it was entitlement, the kind that feeds on making others feel small. By lunchtime, the cafe was packed. Orders were flying in, laughter echoed, and I almost forgot he existed, until my hand slipped. Just a small accident. A few drops of sauce fell on his sleeve. I gasped, immediately apologizing. But his reaction was faster than reason. His chair screeched back, his voice rose, and the room fell silent. He shouted, called me names, humiliated me for everyone to hear. And as I stood there, frozen, heart-pounding, I realized something. This was the moment that would change everything, because the line between humiliation and destiny was about to blur forever. His voice sliced through the air like a whip. The cafe went silent. Even the espresso machine hissed and stopped, as if it didn't dare interrupt his anger. "Do you even know how much this suit costs?" he shouted, standing up so fast that his chair crashed to the floor. Everyone stared. My cheeks burned, but I stayed still, hands trembling around the tray. I whispered an apology, trying to explain it was an accident, but he wasn't listening. Men like him never do. He mocked me, repeating my apology in a cruel, exaggerated tone. "I'm sorry," he mimicked, twisting the words until the crowd chuckled nervously. "You should be. Look at you, a waitress pretending she belongs in a place like this." His words hit harder than his voice. I wanted to disappear, but pride kept me upright. I'd faced struggle before, poverty, hunger, judgment, but this was different. This was a humiliation designed to break a person from the inside. He kept going, louder, crueler, feeding off the attention. Some customers averted their eyes, others watched, curious, entertained. My co-workers looked away, pretending to polish tables. No one stepped forward, and that silence, that cold, heavy silence, was worse than his shouting. It told me that kindness was a rare luxury in places where arrogance paid better tips. Then it happened. In his rage, he grabbed me, his fingers tangled in my hair, yanking so hard I gasped. The pain was sharp, sudden, and humiliating. My body stumbled forward as he dragged me toward the entrance, shouting, "You're fired! Get out before I have you thrown out myself." The crowd gasped but didn't move. Phones came out. People recorded. For a split second, I saw my reflection in the cafe window, my face pale, eyes wide, and I thought, is this how dignity dies? But just as the world narrowed into that single moment of shame, something changed. The door chimed again, but this time the sound felt heavy, commanding, the kind that makes people stop breathing for a second. The arrogant man froze mid-yell, his grip loosened, and his expression faltered. I followed his gaze and saw a sight that made the room go utterly still. Outside, through the glass, I saw them, a line of luxury cars pulling up one after another, engines humming in perfect unison. Security guards in tailored suits stepped out first, then the man whose presence could silence an entire city, Mr. Sterling, my father-in-law, the man no one dared cross. He entered without a word, his calm more dangerous than any shout. The arrogant man stumbled back, color draining from his face. Everyone bowed their heads slightly, unsure of what was happening, but I knew. I stood there, my hair disheveled, my dignity bruised, and yet in that silence, I felt the shift. Power had just entered the room, and this time, it was on my side. When Mr. Sterling walked in, the atmosphere changed instantly, like the air itself recognized who had arrived. His presence was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority. Every eye turned to him. Even the arrogant man who just dragged me by my hair stumbled backward, his bravado dissolving faster than spilled coffee. Mr. Sterling's security guards spread out silently, forming a calm but unmistakable barrier around him. And then he spoke, not loud, not angry, just steady, controlled, terrifyingly calm. "Let her go," he said. Just 3 words, the kind that could end careers. The man's fingers slipped from my hair, his face pale. He stuttered, I didn't know she was..." But Mr. Sterling didn't let him finish. He looked around the cafe, his eyes moving over the frozen customers and trembling staff. "You all saw this happen?" he asked. His tone wasn't a question. It was an accusation wrapped in ice. No one replied. You could have heard a pin drop. Then, in that same stillness, he turned to the man. "Do you know who you just laid your hands on?" The man shook his head nervously. Mr. Sterling took a step closer, his voice a little lower now, like thunder right before a storm. "That woman," he said, pointing at me, "is my daughter-in-law." Gasps echoed through the room. A few people dropped their phones. The arrogant man's knees nearly buckled. Your daughter-in-law?" he whispered. Mr. Sterling nodded once. "You thought you were humiliating a waitress. Instead, you exposed your own lack of class. Power without respect is nothing but noise." He turned to the manager, who had been hiding behind the counter. "And you," he continued, his eyes cold, "stood there watching it happen. You are relieved of your position. Effective immediately." The manager tried to protest, but the security guards were already moving. The billionaire's gaze shifted back to the man who had attacked me. "Every business deal you have with Sterling Enterprises," he said, "ends today. Every contract, every partnership, gone. Consider this, the price of arrogance." The man fell to his knees, begging, but Mr. Sterling didn't even blink. He simply said, "Escort him out." As the guards led him away, the cafe erupted in whispers. Some looked at me with new eyes, not pity, but respect. But I didn't feel powerful. I just felt still. Everything had happened so fast that my mind hadn't caught up. Mr. Sterling turned to me then, his expression softening for the first time. He took off his coat and gently placed it around my shoulders. "You handled yourself with grace," he said quietly. "Even when no one stood for you. That's what makes a leader. Not a title, but character." In that moment, I realized something I'd never seen before. True strength doesn't shout. It speaks once, and the world listens. The next few days felt like a blur, a whirlwind I could barely keep up with. By the next morning, the video of what happened had already gone viral. Millions had watched the arrogant man's outburst, his cruelty, and the moment Mr. Sterling walked in. My humiliation had become a headline. Billionaire's daughter-in-law dragged by customer, justice served instantly. I should have felt embarrassed that the world had seen me at my lowest, but strangely, I didn't. For the first time, people weren't laughing, they were listening. Everywhere I went, people whispered words like respect, grace, and courage. Even those who once looked down on me now spoke softly when they saw me. Reporters camped outside the cafe, desperate to hear my side of the story, but I stayed silent. I didn't want fame, I wanted peace. And somehow that silence spoke louder than any interview ever could. Mr. Sterling called me to his office a few days later. The same man who had commanded a room with 3 words now looked at me like a proud father. "You didn't fight back with anger," he said. "You stayed calm when the world expected you to crumble. That takes strength money can't buy." He paused, then added with a rare smile, "You've earned something more than an apology. You've earned your place." He offered me the position of manager, officially this time, not because of my connection to his son, but because I had proven myself in the worst of moments. I accepted, not out of pride, but out of purpose. I wanted to turn that cafe into something more than a business. I wanted it to be a place where dignity was served alongside coffee. When I returned, the staff greeted me with hesitant smiles, unsure of how to act around me now. I told them gently, "I'm still Emma. I'm still one of you, but we're going to change how this place feels." I removed the old staff rules board that focused on obedience and replaced it with one simple phrase: "Respect is our language." Ethan visited that evening, his face glowing with quiet pride. "You've done more than survive," he said softly. "You've changed what this place stands for." We stood together by the window, watching customers enjoy their coffee, unaware that this cafe had become the symbol of a much bigger story, a story about humility, justice, and grace under fire. The arrogant man had vanished from public life. His business partnerships dissolved, his reputation shredded. Karma didn't need my help. It knew exactly where to find him. And as I watched the soft golden light spill across the cafe tables, I realized the truth. I hadn't just been rescued, I had risen. Because sometimes life doesn't hand you revenge, it hands you recognition. Weeks passed, and life began to settle again, though nothing truly went back to how it was before. The cafe felt different now. There was warmth in the air that hadn't been there before, a quiet sense of respect that touched everything, from the way customers spoke to the way my team worked together. Every cup of coffee we served carried something invisible, a reminder that kindness could transform even the coldest room. I often arrived early, unlocking the doors before sunrise. Those quiet mornings became my favorite part of the day. I'd stand behind the counter, watch the first light spill across the floor, and remember how it all began. How a simple mistake, a cruel man, and one moment of silence changed everything. The world had seen my humiliation, yes, but it had also seen my resilience. And that mattered more. Ethan still visited me every evening, bringing laughter where stress tried to linger. He never treated me like someone fragile or pitied. Instead, he looked at me with the same admiration he'd had the very first day he saw me at the old cafe. The waitress with tired eyes but an unbroken spirit. His love wasn't the kind that demanded attention. It was steady, patient, and proud. Mr. Sterling stopped by once a week, though he never stayed long. He'd simply walk in, order his usual tea, and observe quietly, watching me manage, lead, and grow. One afternoon, as he prepared to leave, he said something that stayed with me forever. "You've turned a business into a mirror of your soul. Grace built this, not money." Those words weren't just a compliment, they were a legacy. Because of them, I promised myself that every person who walked through our doors, whether rich or poor, would be treated with the same dignity I once fought for. No one would ever feel small here again. The world eventually moved on to new headlines, new scandals, new stories, but that day in the cafe remained like a quiet legend. And sometimes when a new customer recognized me and whispered, "You're her, aren't you?" I just smiled and said, "I'm someone who learned that power doesn't always wear a suit." As I closed the cafe one night, the city lights shimmering outside, I whispered to myself, "He dragged me to the floor, but life lifted me higher than he'll ever stand." Because real victory isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention or applause. It simply stands tall, silent, graceful, and unshakable. If you're still listening, remember this. Never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes silence is just strength preparing its moment to rise. If this story touched your heart, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that true power isn't loud, it's kind. Comment below. Have you ever seen arrogance crumble before kindness?